This is George Newbern, the voice of Superman, and you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Get charged up for action that'll shock your system.
Tell me that's not cool.
An unstoppable superhero and his crew embark on impossible missions and will bring mutated villains to justice.
When Static's in the house, bad guys better step off.
Pull the plug on crime with the adventures of Static Shock. Yeah!
Welcome, everybody, to episode 210 of the DCAU Review. I am Liam, and with me, as he always is Cal. Cal, we are just moving right along for yet another month of Static Shock reviews, and we got a pretty interesting one to talk about today.
That is right, Liam. As you mentioned last week, we jumped around a lot this month. We did a season 1 episode. We did a season 3 episode. Hey, let's split the difference. Let's do a season 2 episode for this week. And we are going to be covering the very Richie-centric, and if you recall, as we mentioned last week, this is pre-Gear Richie, season 2. So a very Richie-centric episode called Power Play. So we learn a little bit about the dynamic and friendship between Richie and Virgil, and Richie gets into a little bit of trouble that may or may not be a stand-in for drug addiction or alcohol addiction or some sort of addictive property, cigarettes maybe, I don't know, but we'll discuss that when we get into our plot, I suppose.
Absolutely, and we will get to that plot in a moment here, Cal, but first I must bring us our official Imdb Synopsis, of course brought to you by the wonderful Pod Tower YouTube channel, which we are a part of, along with the folks from Watchtower Database and Tim Talk. You can head to youtube.com/the Pod Tower and subscribe. Even if you don't listen to your podcasts on YouTube, it still helps us out to just click that little subscribe button. So we appreciate that. You'd be helping us and some other fine folks out. But yes, this is the synopsis for Power Play, which is written by Dwayne McDuffie, directed by Joe Sikta, with music by Richard Wolf and animation by Dong Wu. And that synopsis reads as such. Richie becomes envious of Static's powers and yearns to be a hero too, wanting to be a partner rather than a sidekick. When a mysterious encounter lands him new powers, Richie becomes consumed by it, but the price he has to pay to keep them is more than he bargained for.
All right. I would have combined both of those paragraphs, or just gone with the second one. Probably seems a little wordy. A lot of information. Light
on detail, despite using that many words too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we got a little too clever for our own good this week.
I did like that they used the word yearn, though. It's an underused.
That's a good one.
Yep, yearn. I will also mention, did not mention at the beginning, but this episode aired originally here in the States back on February the 2nd, 2002. That means we just passed the 20-year anniversary of this episode's original debut.
Absolutely, Cal. And with all of that preamble, we can move right on into our plot discussion, the first of our 4 main categories. And when it comes to the plot here, we kick off with kind of a funny little scene as we see Richie. We establish right off the bat that Richie has a bit of hero envy, should we say, with when it relates to Static and maybe some of the other humans around town in Dakota. So he's sort of imagining himself as this grand superhero and imagining villains for him to face, and he's complete with costume and a broom handle that he's pretending is some sort of a cosmic weapon.
Evil, sinister tentacles threaten to strangle the fair city of Dakota. But fear not, for today a new champion is born. Soaring through the sky, our young hero spots trouble on the ground. All right, Dr. Insidious, your plan to destroy the world with your Mondo gravity ray is over. Armed with his awesome electro quarterstaff, he makes quick work of the evil doctor's heinous henchmen. stuff! Dodging death rays, he makes a desperate dive for the control panel. If he can reach it, how long have you been there?
I came in at Heinous Henchman.
Why didn't you say anything?
I wanted to see how it turned out.
And after a minute or so of that, we see that Static has been sitting there quietly watching Richie's imaginary adventures. And we established right off the bat, Richie's he really goes 0 to 100 as far as he's very angry that Static is kind of busting his chops over this pretend fantasy that he had, and very quickly goes right to, I think the wrong person got the powers, and storms off. So we established very quickly that Richie has himself quite the inferiority complex in this episode.
Yeah, and it's not something that we really have seen or heard from before, so it kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere. I think if we're critiquing the plot as we kind of go here, that could have been something that maybe would have set out in prior episodes, that he had a bit of a jealousy, or maybe even just mentioning one-off, like, oh man, I wish I had gotten powers too, or something like that. Or perhaps having a prior episode that dealt with him recognizing and maybe Virgil sharing with some of his struggles with having the powers and not wishing to have them, and Richie maybe, arguing and saying, well, I wish I did have them. But yeah, because this does feel very, very like it escalates very quickly. I'll just say that. But yeah, Richie is somewhat embarrassed. I think that seemingly led to the escalation. He's embarrassed that Static was sort of watching him quietly and snickering afterwards. And Static goes out of his way to somewhat quell Richie's anger by saying, hey, we all have heroes, and mentions one of his own heroes. But Richie is still quite embarrassed and upset. And as you mentioned, that line of, I think the wrong person got powers, is the one that he throws out there. And he's still sort of muttering it to himself as he's riding away on his scooter in a very angrily manner. And he decides to ride through this construction site where, of course, just like any good 80s or 90s kids movie, he runs into a mysterious stranger who is lurking a bit, and he literally runs into this stranger on his on his scooter, because the stranger seemingly appears out of nowhere. The stranger grabs him by the hand as he stands up, and there's this sort of electrical current that occurs between them, and Richie is confused and taken aback as to what just happened. And the old man pretends as if he doesn't know what Richie is talking about. Richie then looks up and sees a pair of young gentlemen in these bright colored jumpsuits sitting on what appears to be some sort of playground equipment, and they're snickering and laughing. He turns to look for the old man again and doesn't see him, and then he looks back to towards the young men, and they also are gone. So he quickly stands up, gets on his scooter, and scatters, and is left to sort of recount the whole thing to Virgil the very next day at lunch.
That's right, and we kind of pick up right there as he's sort of talking to Virgil and explaining what happened, and it all seems so strange. And as Virgil goes back inside to the restaurant to get them some refills on their drinks, a real Nuns and Dynamite moment pops up, as the Flash famously said once. As yes, randomly there's a large truck that is barreling down the streets of Dakota out of control. The brakes apparently fail, as we hear the driver say a couple minutes later. And wouldn't you know it, a little dog, a puppy, runs out into the street and is just frozen in fear. And Richie springs into action to save the little dog. And right then, the truck is about to collide with Richie, and we see Richie put his hands up. And wouldn't you know it, Richie gets his wish. His wish has come true. And he shows off this mysterious force field power. And as Static is or Virgil is coming back out of the restaurant, he sees this and quickly grabs Richie and takes him away. And they go back to, I think, right where Virgil trained in the very first episode of the series. They go back to the old junkyard, and we have sort of a varying tests of Richie's powers. He's having trouble reactivating them at first, and then Virgil sort of helps him figure out how to use them, and they sort of test their powers against each other a little bit. And Richie is just so over the moon about this that he realizes that he can use this push power to not only create force fields, but to sort of fire energy blasts and even sort of propel himself into the air. He can literally fly. And he's having so much fun, but right as he gets airborne, those powers begin to flicker and fade away, and he starts falling fast back towards the earth. Virgil is able to do some quick thinking and save him right at the last second from falling to his doom. And quickly, Richie is really uncomfortable as he believes that his powers have now faded away, and he's right back to square one, and he's quite upset with this apparent loss of this newfound power.
Yeah, so Richie quite frustrated with his loss of power, and he's very depressed. There's a scene with him and his mom talking, and his mom tries to check in on him, and she clearly sees that he's acting out of sorts. So he decides at that moment to leave his house in search of the old man and heads back to the construction site where he first interacted with him. And wouldn't you know, the old man is back there along with those two strange fellows that he saw hanging around. And the man introduces himself as Ragtag. He says, "Call me Ragtag," and no one does. I think that's the funniest part of this character.
Who are you?
My real name is unimportant. Call me Ragtag. From the moment I touched your hand, I knew you were special. I could tell you have great potential.
So you can give me powers again?
Of course. And in return for my gift, I only ask one thing, at least for now. Promise me you will never tell anyone where or how you got your powers.
I promise.
Good. Then it's our little secret.
This is a point that we will all, man and humankind will come back to over and over again throughout the ages. And that is just this quite simple fact. You cannot give yourself a nickname. It has to be given to you. You can't try to give yourself a nickname. It never works. I'm telling you.
Nope, this is absolutely 100% correct. So yes, Ragtag, despite introducing himself that way and never called that, reveals that he himself, despite being an old man, is a baby again, meaning, of course, a bang baby. He was affected by the Big Bang. And his powers, however, are that he doesn't have powers, but he can bestow powers to people. And he references, I tell you what, tried to give himself the nickname Ragtag. And then he names the two other young men that he's bestowed powers upon Run and Jump. Why? Because the one can run really fast, and the other one is Jump because he can teleport from place to place. So I guess he jumps around a lot. So
like the movie Jumper.
There you go. Yes, maybe it is a reference to that
a retroactive reference to like the 2007 Hayden Christensen vehicle Jumper. Clearly, that's what they were going for in this cartoon that debuted in 2002.
Yes, a deep cut for sure. Retroactive Easter egg for sure. But yeah, so Run and Jump are the other two gentlemen he's bestowed powers on. And he promises once Richie admits to him that he does need and want more power or his powers back, he grants them to him freely under one condition, and that's that he not tell anyone who he was or where he got his powers from. So Richie agrees, and he holds up the staff and bestows the powers on him once again. And it appears that his powers have been restored to where they were just before, maybe even a little bit more powerful. So we cut to a scene. A lot of happenstance occurs here where, wouldn't you know it, there's a separate construction site, I believe that's happening here. We have a crane that's on the edge of a building, and it's lifting up some heavy steel girders. And just like in Superman the Animated Series, these guys just they said, you know what, we're going to lift up as many as possible. We're not going to worry about this crane dropping off the side of the building or it being too heavy, because that's not a thing. We need to get these up here as quickly as possible. So, and there's 2 men in this crane for some reason, even though it's a crane. Why are there 2 men in the crane? I don't know. There's 2 men in the crane. So the crane begins to fail, and Static is flying in to attempt to keep the crane from falling off the side of the building. It begins to snap sort of right at the top. So as Static attempts to keep that part of the crane from falling, the doors swing open and the gentlemen on the crane begin to tumble as they jump out, but they're on the edge of the building that begins to crumble where the crane is, and the crane begins to fall off of this giant building. And as they're falling, thankfully, we have the arrival of another new superhero who decided to give him his own name. Very original. Maybe the old man bestowed it upon him. Hard to say, but we have the arrival for the first time in Static history of Push.
That is right. Richie has gotten his own color coordinated jumpsuit to wear, along with run and jump. And he is here to help save the day. Static continues to struggle with this giant piece of the metal crane that has fallen off. And meanwhile, Richie is able to carry a lot of the civilians to safety, as well as save the 2 construction workers. Doesn't do much about the actual large machinery falling towards the earth. That still crashes down, but he is able to at least save the individuals, and really soaks in that adulation as Static sort of just finally is able to keep that giant piece of metal from crashing into the city. Meanwhile, Richie is very much enjoying the attention from the various citizens, including a couple of young ladies who seem very infatuated with him. But he quickly sees Static, and they decide they need to go have a conversation, and they fly off. And it becomes clear very quickly that Static is concerned about this and what he's doing, and he feels like there could be some danger to it all, and that this could all be going to Richie's head a little bit too fast. And there we really see this begins to smell of our heavy-handed metaphor for I guess it's drugs. Is that what we're doing this week?
It's some sort of something with an addictive property. Drugs. Yeah. Hey, for 2022, it could be vaping. Vaping these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, it's clear now that Richie loves this power and will do anything to keep it, and even sort of is willing to come to blows with Static over this, and sort of accuses Static of being jealous, and sort of feeling like that Static is being unfair to him, and is only concerned because suddenly Richie is as powerful as he is, and he's not the special one anymore. And so Richie at that point flies off after, as we said, they sort of literally physically come to blows, and Richie flies off.
You want to tell me what's going on?
Simple. I'm a superhero.
Yeah, Richie, I got that much.
Excuse me, when I'm in costume, I'd prefer that you address me by my superhero handle. From now on, just call me Push.
Okay, Push. How'd you get your powers back? And where'd they come from in the first place?
Sorry, bud. That's classified.
What? And this isn't like you. The heavy too, the big secrets. What's up?
Nothing's up, except me. I feel great. Better than I ever felt.
That doesn't answer my... Hey, does this have something to do with that old guy you met? It does, doesn't it?
Mind your own business, V.
You are my business partner.
Oh, I see. When you're the only one with powers, everything's fine. When I get them too, suddenly it's a crisis.
That's not what I said, Rich. Frankly, I just think this thing is getting out of your control.
I can handle it. And I don't have to explain myself to you or anybody. Now back off!
As we find out that he's once again a little bit low on power, he flies directly back to Ragtag and the rest of the crew there. And just as his powers fade out, he's able to land there. And as he gets back into Ragtag's sanctum, I guess. He's grieved by them, and he once again begs Ragtag to give him more power, and of course the old man says that he will, but if he wants it this time, it's going to cost him something. And we quickly find out as we set up our third act here that if Richie wants to continue being a hero, to continue doing good, he's going to have to do something pretty bad first.
In order to become a hero, he must first become a villain.
That's right.
What the 2000s or 1990s voiceover guy would say on a preview.
Great tagline for an Image comic of in 1996.
There we go. Yes. So Richie, of course, has to meet up with Run and Jump. I'm still dying that these are their names, and they are outside some sort of jewelry museum or something. I think is I don't know. It's very nondescript, but they're breaking in. They're each going to play a part. The plan is laid out very clearly to Richie. Richie is there in full garb, by the way. I like that he gets rid of his earring. He changes his glasses and gets rid of his earring, and that's how he disguises himself. People talk about Clark Kent having a weak alias with just wearing glasses.
Pretty great.
But taking your earring out as a way to disguise yourself is maybe a little bit less inconspicuous. But anyway, so we're here at this museum and they're about to lay it out. And Richie realizes sort of the foolishness of this. He even mentions to them that he wants to be a hero. He doesn't want to be a villain. They tell him, well, you can't be a hero without powers, and you can't have power unless you get it from the old man. They even try and encourage him and say that their powers are sticking around longer now that they've had more recharges. So they start the process of breaking into this museum, and it's at that point that Richie realizes that he's not down with this. So he actually intentionally sets off the museum alarm, which Run and Jump are none too happy about, and they begin to turn on Richie, who is, wouldn't you know it, his powers are almost drained at this point. And just as it appears that Richie is done for and is about to be overtaken, good thing his good friend Static has arrived just in time to save his bacon. There's a little bit of a battle that ensues between Static and Run and Jump. He's able to use his static cling to keep Run stuck to something, and then electrocutes him to knock him out. And then Jump, he's able to just electrocutes him too. And despite him jumping through a portal, he comes out the other side of a portal and is sort of incapacitated at that point. So it takes a lot out of Static, clearly, but they decide that they're going to, at that point, head back and deal with the old man. And once they return, the old man is none too happy that Richie has returned without any goods, and decides that he's going to try and take it out on Richie. We also see Static, of course, has arrived as well. Static's actually the first one there to confront him with it. And we learn that Ragtag, or the old man as he's more known as, not only does he give powers, but he can also take power away. So he's got a little bit of parasite type powers about him, but I guess he doesn't get the powers. He can just take the powers away. So he's trying to drain Static's life force at that point, and that's when Richie intercedes and breaks it up, and there's a ensuing battle between the two of them as they fight over his staff. He ends up tumbling over the side of a building and asks Richie for help. He extends his hand, and then Richie realizes it's trick, and Richie lets him fall to his death. Well. Maybe I don't know. He does land very far down in a dumpster, but it's a steep drop off of a building, and he's not really ever heard from again. So who knows? Maybe
he's 78 years old. So
yeah, he's an old man, and he fell into a dumpster from many stories up. So well, we'll just say my headcanon is the man is dead. The man died. He's a pile of dust in that dumpster. But we then wrap things up with a nice little ending here, as we did so often with this show, where Richie and Virgil are sort of decompressing and talking about their experience. Richie happily putting his push uniform away in the closet, happy to once again be the sidekick, as he refers it, and Static assures him that he's happy that Richie is there to have his back. And they get into a bit of a semi-meta debate here, sort of like a classic comic book fans argument over which superhero would win in a fight, as they begin to argue over who would have won and who had the more powerful set of powers. And so they decide that they're going to settle it once and for all, and they're going to do that. Not, of course, by fists, or since Richie doesn't have powers, not power to power, but they're going to go to our arcade and play a video game, and may the best man win. And that's kind of how our episode wraps up here for this week.
Hanging it all up, huh?
Yep. I miss having superpowers. But all things considered, I think I'll stick to being a sidekick.
Glad to hear it. I feel better knowing you got my back.
Even though I was more powerful than you.
In your dreams, pushy boy.
Oh yeah? Then how come you couldn't break through my force field?
Because I wasn't even trying.
Was too.
Was not.
Guess there's only one way to settle this.
Man to man.
No quarter asked, no quarter given.
You're on.
Give me a quarter.
Your will is strong, young bushwhacker, but it is no match for my thumbs of darkness.
Oh, yeah? Button you press.
Absolutely, yeah. So all's well that ends well. As we leave the sunny skies of Dakota for this week. Yeah. So as we begin to wrap up here and give our plot scores, I like this episode as like a concept. Obviously, it's knowing where the series goes, and that Gear does become a full-fledged superhero later on. It maybe lessens what this episode means when he's, as opposed to this one where it seems more like a one-off of, oh, it's the one where Richie gets superpowers. But I think as an episode, as a concept of the sidekick or the supporting character feeling a bit inferior to the star of the show, and then getting a taste of what that life could be like, and kind of going on an ego trip about it. I think there's good stuff in here. I think we'll talk about it in visuals. I think it's a fun episode to watch. I do think it breaks down a little bit in one. I don't think Richie is sufficiently punished for being such a jerk.
Also,
again, he
assisting in breaking and entering to a jewelry museum.
So he just goes 0 to 100 again, right in that first scene where he's telling Virgil that the wrong kid got the powers, and then again when Virgil's clearly just trying to help him and is concerned about him, he's very quick to use his powers against Virgil. And I understand, again, like we said, they sort of lean into a little bit of that this is like an addiction thing, and the old man is the dealer who gave Richie a couple of free tastes before demanding payment for his final thing. So I understand that's kind of what they were going for, is that, a lot of times in real life, addiction makes people act out of the ordinary. But he was still a jerk at the start of the episode before he had the powers.
Yep.
And I think ultimately the lesson here is, one, yes, addiction is dangerous. Don't talk to strangers. And anyone can be a hero, even if they don't have superpowers. So they put a lot of little bows on the lessons being taught this week. Like I said, I think it's a fun episode. The silly names that the villains have, notwithstanding, I think it's a fun concept. I just don't know that it all comes together too perfectly, and it feels like we just kind of hit a reset button, whereas it feels like it should be a much bigger deal that Richie physically attacked his best friend.
Agreed.
And we just wrap it up, and everything's all good and everything's all hunky-dory now. And so I think, like I said, I think there's fun concepts in it, and as we'll get to in other categories, there is other good things to say about it. But as a story, I thought it was just, like I said, interesting idea, maybe not perfectly executed. I ended up settling on a 6 out of 10 for my plot.
Yeah, I gave it the same exact score. I think for those exact reasons, I won't rehash any of that stuff, but I think the Richie character, and it's interesting, as you mentioned, because he ends up getting powers, this does feel like I don't know. It feels a little lessened, a little cheapened, I guess, because we know that he ultimately does get powers at the end. So I don't know. I think if they had zeroed in on it, I think that if you had done a little bit better at seeing some of the consequences that Richie faced because he was seeking the power, like there's a little rift. And we know that there's sort of the thing where Static has to cover for him because he lied to his mom about where he was going. But that's literally one very short scene. So you don't really see the fracture between his relationship with his parents or his mom even, or, you really don't really get to feel the full brunt of this. And I get it. We kind of talked about it last week. Sometimes the stories for these episodes are very hampered because not only are they only 22 minutes, but it's very, very, at times it's very watered down because it is a child's show. It's a kid's show. They didn't go for those deeper, darker themes all the time. So I think that if you had maybe 2 parts to spread this over, that could have created a little more depth or made it a little bit more effective, like you said, to see some more of those consequences for seeking this power over his putting it ahead of everything or ahead of his relationships, and really drive that addiction parallel home. Or maybe start out with him getting the powers right away in the first scene, and maybe cut out the scene where he infers that Static's getting jealous. Although I do kind of like that dynamic, because that's always it's always an interesting thing where you start accusing the hero of being jealous of the exposure that the new guy is getting. But yeah, it's just there's some good things. It's just not a home run, I don't think. So I gave it the same exact score, 6 out of 10.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And Cal, that will move us on to visuals and animation. And the first thing, we already kind of touched on it a little bit, but the first thing that stuck out to me was the character designs in this week's episode. We have 3 new villains, as well as Richie's superhero alter ego. As mentioned, Run, Jump, and Push all have these, it's kind of, they're all wearing the same sort of outfit. It's these kind of monocolored jackets with like a different colored stripe down the middle, and then these like snow caps on their head, and then of course Push gets goggles as well, because I guess he's concerned with the secret identity. But yeah, I like, it's very like, again, speaking of the 2007 film Jumper, getting a lot of play this week.
2 name checks.
But it's like there's like an era where people were making superhero content but weren't willing to commit to the costume parts of superhero stuff.
Right.
And that's kind of what this feels like. This feels like the Infamous games, or I don't know, one of those like Heroes or something like that. Sure. Where we're doing superhero stories, but we're not willing to commit to full costumes, but we'll kind of give them something. Even Smallville, to a degree.
I was going to say, even the Justice League stand-ins on Smallville all had those matching like leather jumpsuits.
Yes, the leather vests with their hoodies. Yes, it's so it's very of that era, or even maybe a little bit ahead of that era. As far as we're all in sort of these suits, but they're not really traditional superhero or supervillain suits. But yeah, so those designs kind of stood out to me as being kind of quirky and funny. And then I actually really do like the design for the old man. Like, I think he looks real creepy and weird. He almost like there's elements of him. He isn't green, but he kind of reminds me of the witch from Looney Tunes. Like, he has this really elongated chin, and maybe it's the hat too, and has like a wart on his face, and he's just like this really creepy guy. And there's a couple of kind of strange close-ups that you get on him when he's sort of first giving Richie his powers, and then when Richie comes back to him later to get his powers back, he just has this really sinister edge, and he gives off these really creepy vibes, which I guess sort of all culminate when we find out that no, not only can he give powers, but he can also take powers away, and begins to do that to Static. It feels it feels genuinely pretty scary and like a big threat to our hero at that point.
Yeah, imagine if they'd brought him back, if he hadn't died in a dumpster, and they brought him back, and he like, there's an episode where Static loses his powers, and he like takes Static's powers away, and Static actually kind of gets used to the not having powers, and then Richie has to figure out, or they have to figure out a way to outsmart him without their powers or something like that. Like, I know that's old hat kind of been done superhero stuff, but killing this guy, like giving him that power in the very last scene for like 2 seconds feels a little cheap. But yeah, I think visuals this week, I didn't have a whole lot to notate. I will say that this episode, for being a season 2 episode, didn't stand out as being horribly animated. I feel like it was done pretty well for that era. Not my favorite of the Static seasons, but it was fine. I did like the matching suits. I also liked that they changed up the designs on them. So Jump has like an up shape on his, like an upward facing arrow, and Run has a downward facing arrow, and then Richie has like just a pair of parallel lines on his shirt, so kind of goes straight across. So I do like that there was some variety there. I also, of course, Run's colors being red and yellow, perhaps an homage to other speedsters in the DC universe. I thought that was pretty great. But yeah, I think that Static Kling also making an appearance. We also talk about,
yes,
we always like to point out the Deus Ex Machina, whatever powers that Static needs to use, his powers are just nondescript, and they just can be whatever the storyline calls for. And in this week's episode, he uses them to call Richie's house from a phone line that he's flying up and touching, and he creates a keypad using electricity to dial, so that he can dial Richie's mom's home phone from wherever he is in Dakota. So I did find that it's hilarious, because it's definitely a product of its time. Home phones, people flying up to use telephone wire Static needing to call somebody's house from the road and not having a cell phone, or just not dialing Richie's cell phone, was pretty funny, I thought. But also just that he had to create a giant keypad to dial the numbers to get to get connected to Richie's mom's house. So I really enjoyed that. But yeah, other than that, I didn't think there was anything that stood out too much. I was a little disappointed that Richie's powers were not differentiated that much, at least by color, from Static's. That opening part at the junkyard where they're having their little test of strength, their powers are literally the same color, purple, bluish, whatever Static's powers are manifested as. So it was really hard to tell whose powers were what. It didn't really seem like Richie's powers were differentiated very well, or what his power set was at the beginning. He does create some like constructs in that, as he's saving the guys from the crane. He kind of creates a couple of scoops and things to push and catch. So I did appreciate that, but that didn't come until that scene, and we don't really see much more of it because his powers are drained afterwards. So with all that said, I ended up giving visuals and animation an okay 6 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I went 1 point higher. I went 7 out of 10. I think for the reasons we've talked about, I do think we could have maybe seen a little bit higher. I think if they had combined those final 2 kind of confrontations, you have Static sort of single-handedly take down Run and Jump at the museum or whatever it was, and then go to a different location for that final battle with the old man. So I think maybe if they had that all together, or maybe Static is fighting off those 2 and Richie is sort of left alone to deal with this old man, I think maybe that could have created a more interesting and maybe more action-packed finale to the episode. But yeah, overall, I do think, like I said, I like Richie's look in the scene where he comes to save the the crane accident. I think that's all pretty cool. Static, holding this thing in this big electrical field, but struggling mightily with it, and then Richie showing up right in the nick of time and making little constructs, in fact, with his energy powers is cool. And then I actually really enjoyed the bit in the junkyard where Richie's flying up and his powers fade and he's falling, and Virgil has to think quick, and he doesn't have his static saucer, I believe. We figured out that's the name of it, but he doesn't have that. He doesn't have that on him, so he instead sees a hubcap on a nearby tire in the junkyard and quickly pulls that off and sort of hops on it with one foot and is trying to balance himself as he flies up to catch Richie. I thought that was kind of a cool bit of seeing the superhero be a little bit out of his element, but still being able to think fast and save his friend. I thought that was really neat. So yeah, there's definitely some fun things, but maybe not as much fun as you would think based on the various powers and things that we were shown in the episode. So yeah, I settled on a 7 out of 10 for my score. And with that, Cal, I believe that will take us to our third category, which of course will be music. Richard Wolf, once again, doing the music this week. The good news for you is that there are no lyrics to my knowledge, other than, of course, the guy saying Static Shock.
Nope, that's not true. Not true.
Oh, what did I miss? What did I miss?
There's one scene where I think it's right when Static and Richie are on the roof and Static confronts him right after Richie has saved the crane, and he tries to kind of find out what's happening, and they begin to kind of go up against each other. There's a song that comes through with the lyrics fight, 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 fight. I couldn't make out any additional lyrics, but there's a lot of the same thing in it. I couldn't tell you who they were emulating, which hip hop artists they might have been emulating, but yeah, it wasn't full lines of lyrics. It didn't sound like it was just screaming the word fight a lot.
Well, there we go. But yeah, my only music notes I had were actually in that crane scene, as Richie sort of swoops in and saves the day. You get like a little bit of the drum machine, but very triumphant hero music playing, and then Static sort of slowly cuts back to Static sort of slowly carrying this giant hunk of metal and slowly lowering it to the ground, and it's just like this little bit of like synthesizer, but it's played very comedically, I thought. Mm-hmm. It kind of adds to that as Richie goes, "Oh, hey, it's Static. He really helped me out here, and he helped me save the day." And then it cuts back to all of the innocent bystanders that Richie saved, all kind of scowling at him because he's been just struggling with this one piece of metal while Push was saving the day. So I thought the music kind of added a little bit to that, and to the bit there with actually right after that when Richie goes back to the old man for the third time, and just this sort of sinister, it's very light, but there's some, like, a drum machine comes in as he's sort of climbing up the fire escape, and it brings in this sort of sinister music as he arrives back to the old man and his lackeys there at the end. So nothing too spectacular, but I thought some fun moments that added to it. And of course, I'm always a fan of that season 2 Static theme that also happens to come in during some of our action sequences. So I ended up settling on a 6 out of 10 for music.
Nice. Yeah, I went with a 5 out of 10. I will say that I also liked, there's sort of a, right before that fight scene, there's a, when Push makes his debut, there's a sort of a Push theme that plays. It's electric guitar, and it's it actually sounded a little bit out of place for what we're used to, because it was a break sort of from the drum machine and general hip hop flavor of the whole show that we usually are used to. I did like the use of the Static theme in the end, especially as he's taking on Run and Jump, and when it comes in as the Static cling takes hold. I really enjoyed that. But yeah, so 5 out of 10 is usually a good sign for a Static review for me. Wolfie, as he's known, apparently. I noticed that for the first time today, that Richard Wolfie Wolf is his official credit for the in the credits. So Wolfie didn't do too bad this week. So kudos to him. But still, a 5 out of 10 is typically a good score for me on a static week.
Yeah, I think especially I can go back just one week and hear quite a different tune, so to speak, from yourself when it came to your musical score. So a big improvement this week in your book. So, and with that, Cal, that will bring us to our final category here, which of course is our voice acting, in addition to our main stars, who we'll get to in a moment. Not a huge cast to talk about. We do briefly have Jean Smart again as Mrs. Foley. And then, of course, we have Philip Tanzini as Run and Kenny Blank as Jump. Both of them are veteran voice actors, just done a lot of video games and sort of a lot of like background additional voices credits for various cartoons and video games, as well as some starring roles as well. But I don't feel like we get enough of a sense of their personalities, which again I feel like is maybe a failure of this episode, because I mean, it is satisfying when Static beats them up, but I don't feel like we don't really get much other than they're both they're into the crime side of this deal, and Richie's not. That's kind of their own defining characteristic.
Because they're evil is what you might say. Yes, there's not a lot fleshed out for those characters, so they're perfectly fine. I know that they also play additional roles on Static in later episodes, smaller roles, I believe. So yeah, not a whole lot to mention or to critique for this week, but it is great to see them get their comeuppance after being very arrogant and taunting Static. So we do get that at least.
Absolutely. And elsewhere in our cast are our main villain, the old man, or as he tried to call himself, Ragtag. We have Richard Libertini, who, man, you talk about like a character actor. This guy had a lot of credits to his name over the years. Not a lot of huge roles. His most famous ones were things like, appeared on an episode of Star Trek here, or a sitcom there, or was in the live action Popeye movie. I think was the top credited act on there. I think he also had quite a few voice acting credits to his name as well. So, but again, I think he does have a very weird. It is cartoony and over the top, but for what this episode is and for that character design, I think it totally works as this just real sinister, like witchy guy.
Yeah, he actually, like, I was surprised. I thought his voice acting was pretty strong, and I was surprised that he didn't have at least one additional role in the DCAU. I thought he warranted well enough to get something out of it, even if it was a minor role, perhaps in Justice League or something that was done later. But unfortunately, this was his only spot, I believe, and it was good. He played him evil. I love how at the end when he realizes that Richie is turned on him and is no longer under his proverbial spell, that he kind of gets frustrated with him, and that's right before he's dropped into the dumpster. So yeah, I think he does a strong performance this week, and for somebody that we hadn't heard from in a prior DCAU episode, I thought he did quite well.
I totally agreed. Yeah, like I said, I think it's just got it's cartoony and over the top, but still very sinister. And it feels when that big reveal comes at the third act, when he reveals that he can take power too and begins to drain Static. I think it feels very evil and very, like we said, very sinister and dangerous at that point. So a very good job by him. And then of course we have our two main actors of the piece. We have Jason Marsden as Richie, and again, this is a very Richie episode, so he gets a lot to do. And unlike a lot of his season 1 and 2 episodes, especially, I think as we've talked about in the past, he's not just a quip machine this week. He gets to express things, like we said, whether or not it feels totally warranted by the story that we see here. He gets to sort of lash out in anger and then show that that depression when his powers sort of first fade away, and then the desperation when he goes back to the old man, begs for the powers back, and sort of the anger and denial that he throws at Virgil in that scene. A really good job, I thought, this week by Mr. Marsden.
Well, how very good to see you again, my young friend. Oh, by the way, I heard about your little heroic exploit today. Wonderfully done, really.
Please. I need some more.
Of course you do. That should last you long enough.
No, I need more.
And you shall have more, much more. But first, you'll have to do something for me.
What do you mean?
Yeah, like I said, or like you said, we've at times, not been very complimentary of some of the material that he's been given, but I think we're as far as the Richie character is concerned, he's a strong Richie and definitely does a good job typically with the material that he's given, but this week allowed him to sort of flex those acting chops a little bit and do a little bit more than just deliver a one-liner or a witty joke. Or so I think that his emotion, as you mentioned, even though it's perhaps not warranted, his emotion that he shows right from the get-go of being embarrassed and upset with Static, and then again once he gets the power, sort of being pompous and arrogant and questioning Static's jealousy and all of that. And then ultimately kind of at the end as he reconsiders just where he finds himself because of his desire for these powers, Mr. Marsden did a great job of coming across and expressing the emotion from start to finish for this week. And definitely a grade A for him for this week.
Absolutely. And of course, speaking of grade A, top of the top, Phil Lamarr as Static. What else can possibly be said about this? Obviously, like we said, it's not his episode this week. Jason Marsden certainly gets the lion's share of the work to do in this episode, but just being there, trying to be the supportive friend and help him work through something even when he doesn't want your help. I think the strongest voice acting stuff in the episode, and in an episode that I thought overall was very strong in voice acting, but I think the best stuff is those interactions that Jason Marsden and Phil Lamarr have with each other as they're sort of trying to work out this overarching argument that they were having before Richie got powers that is sort of made worse by Richie, getting semi-addicted to them and sort of taking out and lashing out at Virgil. And so they not surprisingly, of course, Mr. Lamarr and Mr. Marsden play off each other quite well.
Yeah, that heart-wrenching scene where he kind of comes to grips and realizes that his friend isn't quite acting like his friend anymore, and he's really concerned about him and begins to really question his whole attitude and what he's doing, that ultimately leads to the fight between the two of them. And then expressing the concern later on as he's trying to figure out just what he can do to help his friend. I love that. He has a couple of quips at the end that he gets in up against the old man, but most of it is them playing off each other is the highlight for this episode, and a large reason why I ended up giving voice acting a very strong 9 out of 10.
Nice. Yeah, I actually gave it the exact same score of 9 out of 10 there. I think, just a great trio of actors here with, of course, Phil Lamarr, Jason Marsden, and our villain of the piece, Mr. Libertini there. So, a very, very strong week for voice acting overall. And with that, Cal, that will begin to wrap us up. Been a few weeks, but yes, that is the familiar tones of the bonus point sound, and I believe this one, I think I'm up for this one, Cal. This is my bonus point, and we I think briefly alluded to it earlier during our plot summary, but yes, during the scene right at the beginning of the episode, as Richie is pretending to be a superhero, and Virgil comes in and is sort of making fun of him. Virgil mentions that sometimes in his private moments, he pretends he's Green Lantern, and then sort of drops into a bit of an impression of John Stewart, the Green Lantern himself there. So a very meta fun bit of fun there with of course the same voice actor Phil Lamarr playing both roles. And
I'm sorry, Rich. But hey, man, it's no big deal. Sometimes I still pretend to be Green Lantern.
Hail, Guardians of the Universe!
Pretending and Virgil talking about pretending to be Green Lantern. Obviously, these characters get to meet a little bit down the road, including an episode we've already covered in the first time in A League of Their Own, parts 1 and 2, which you can hear back in the archives. But that was so perfect, and they don't linger on it. They don't wink at the camera. They don't wait 10 seconds for the laughter to die down. They just do it and then they move on. And I thought it was really, really, really not only a funny line to throw in, but the timing of it and everything was very good. So thought that deserved an extra +1 for that.
Yeah, that's a great bonus point. Definitely was a fun little meta joke that they included for this week, and for fans of the show later on. Again, if you're an 8-year-old child, that probably doesn't make much of a difference to you watching this at the time. But now as adults, us rewatching this and catching that line and going, I see what you did there. It's a nice little snicker and wink. So yeah, definitely worth a bonus point in my book.
Absolutely, Cal. And with that will actually bring us to our final scores this week. And tallying everything up, I end up with the addition of my 1 bonus point. That brings me to a total of 29 out of 40 this week.
Nice. And I'm just a couple of points lower. I ended up with a 27 out of 40, so not that far off. So Liam, where does this episode lie with you as far as rewatchability is concerned? Because I feel like the argument could be made for a 1 thumb up because it does further the Richie character, but we did talk about how he ends up getting powers anyway, and this episode is sort of wrapped up very quickly. There's no lingering effects to him basically betraying and trying to hurt his best friend. So where does this lie for you?
Yeah, I think this is a skip. I think this is a no thumbs up for me. Not that I didn't enjoy it. I think it's a fun episode. Certainly if you're just watching static, you certainly don't need to skip this one if you've never seen it before. But when we talk about rewatching or coming back to these like we do over the years, this one would not be high on my list as far as an important episode of static for the reasons you just mentioned. It isn't really addressed from here on out. And then on top of that, the lesson learned that you don't need superpowers to be a hero is somewhat undone because they give Richie superpowers after all. And then, of course, as far as it being, it's not at all consequential to this show or to the DCAU as a whole. The villains or anybody never really come back or do anything else in this series or any other. So, yeah, not much. I think to write home about here. And again, that's not to say it isn't a fun or enjoyable episode, but it's probably not one I will come back to too often if and when I do revisit my favorite episodes of Static.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. It's fun, but it's not mandatory watching. Again, I don't know if I need to see this episode ever again. So yeah, that's usually a good sign that it's a skip. So I guess it's a skip from both of us.
That is right, Cal. Well, that will begin to wrap us up here. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Whether you do so on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, if you listen through our main Anchor site, or, of course, as already mentioned, on the Pod Tower YouTube channel, wherever you listen. If that thing that you were listening to us on allows you to give us a review or give us 5 stars or anything like that, we would appreciate you taking the time to do that. That does help us up, gets the show bumped up in the all-important search algorithms as we try to expand our show, maybe get some new listeners. So we always appreciate people who take the time to do that. Or answer our polls every week on the Spotify version of the podcast. That app gives us sort of an exclusive function where we can post a couple of poll questions. We always throw some things up there. So if you listen on Spotify, you can also vote there and let us know what you think. And in the meantime, if you want to reach out to us the old-fashioned way, by which I mean social media, you can, of course, follow us at DCAU Review, both on Twitter and Instagram. The handle is the same. And let us know what you think of not only this episode, but anything that we've reviewed as of late, or you'd like us to review coming up, or any other thoughts on various DCAU projects, or anything really related to comic books or cartoons. We're often talking about that, especially on the Twitter, but always love to hear your thoughts, whether on Twitter or Instagram. And Cal, we are entering our final week of May here. So that means we have one more episode of Static to review before we leave the sunny skies of Dakota for the time being.
That is right, Liam, and we will be continuing with our Static reviews. One more here in the month of May. We will be headed back to season 1, where we will be checking out an episode where Static is framed for a crime he didn't commit. That's right. What's all that all about? We're gonna check it out. It's the episode Replay. Not gonna want to miss that one.
Absolutely, Cal. It'll be a fun way to go out with a bang for the time being with our Static reviews. Definitely next week. Looking forward to that. And always interesting to visit again. Go back to these earliest episodes of Static. So, going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully, everyone listening will join us then. But until then, I'm Liam.
And I'm Cal.
And we'll be back soon with another episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.